Story 1. The Recluse. I've always found so much peace in nature. There's something about the vastness of the wilderness that grounds me, especially in those moments when the weight of urban life becomes too much. At 32, with a demanding job and a crumbling relationship, the thought of a solo camping trip seemed like a perfect escape. I chose a remote spot in the mountains, far from the popular trails. It was a good 3-hour hike in, which meant I wouldn't likely run into anyone. The first day was perfect. The air was crisp, and the seclusion was exactly what I needed. When night fell, I built a fire and cooked a simple meal. As I lay in my tent, listening to the soothing sounds of the forest, I felt the stress of the past few months melt away, but that peace was short-lived. Just after midnight, I was jolted awake by the sound of footsteps outside my tent. I held my breath, trying to make out any distinguishable noises. Was it an animal, or perhaps another camper? I was out in the middle of nowhere. Who else could possibly be out here? I thought to myself. The steps were deliberate, though. Human. They circled my tent, pausing occasionally, as if whoever it was studying my campsite. Every rational bone in my body told me it was just a curious wanderer, maybe someone lost, but an unsettling feeling gnawed at my gut. I finally called out, "Hello? Who's there?" Silence. Then the footsteps retreated. I spent the night on high alert, every little sound sending my heart racing. But as dawn broke and the forest came alive with the chirping of birds, I chided myself for being paranoid. It was probably just a curious individual that meant no harm. Shaking off the unease, I decided to explore the area. As I walked, I noticed something unsettling. Footprints. Not those of an animal, but a pair of boots, similar to mine but larger. They seemed to be following the same path I was on, but were scattered randomly, as if the person was wandering without purpose. Feeling increasingly uneasy, I decided to head back to my camp. As I approached, I noticed that something was off. My tent, which I had made sure to zip up when I left, was open, and its contents were strewn about. I quickly packed up, deciding to cut my trip short. The thought of someone watching, following, and now rummaging through my things was too much. I wanted to get out of there and be around people again. The hike back was nerve-wracking. I scanned the woods and constantly looked behind me, my paranoia at an all-time high. I felt like I was being watched, stalked. After what felt like hours, I needed to take a break. I pulled off the trail and propped myself up against a tree, taking a moment to catch my breath. I didn't intend to take that long of a break, but I guess the lack of sleep from the previous night and constant paranoia finally caught up with me. Before I knew it, I had dozed off. I don't believe I was out long, but when I snapped out of it, my eyes caught the sight of a man standing beside a tree, about 20 feet away from me. He was tall, scruffy, with wild eyes that darted around erratically. He looked like he hadn't bathed in days. Panicking, I leapt up and started backpedaling towards the trail. He took a step at me, then another. Not knowing who this person was, or what his intentions were, I didn't want to stick around to find out. I turned and ran down the trail, shooting a solitary glance over my shoulder to see that he had also stepped out onto the trail. I ran until I reached my car. By the time I got there, my lungs were burning, and my legs felt like jelly. I fumbled with my keys, half expecting the man to appear any second, but I managed to start the car and speed away. Once I reached the main road, I pulled over, the weight of what had happened finally sinking in. I called the police and reported the incident. They sent a few people out and did a small search but found no trace of the man. The officers speculated that he might have been a recluse, someone who had been living off-grid and saw my presence as a threat. They assured me they'd keep an eye out, but nothing else ever came of it. I haven't been camping since. The wilderness, which once brought me peace, now only brings back memories of that terrifying encounter. It's a shame. I used to love going out into the woods. Maybe I'll go back someday, just not alone, and certainly not to those parts of the woods. Story 2. The Screaming Deer. At 26, I was living that city grind office job, late nights, and way too many takeouts. One weekend, feeling particularly trapped in the relentless hustle of life, I decided I needed a change of scenery. A taste of nature seemed like the ideal escape. On a nostalgic whim, I grabbed my dusty camping gear from my college days and headed out to that tranquil forest spot the guys and I used to camp at during spring breaks. The drive out was transformative. With each mile, the city's skyscrapers and busy streets were replaced by towering trees and winding roads. I watched the sun start to set, casting an amazing orange glow over the treetops, and felt a weight lift off my shoulders. The radio played some old tunes, and the cooler air seeping in from the cracked windows was filled with the scent of pine and earth. After parking, I quickly set up my tent and gathered some firewood. The night was pleasantly cool, so I built a crackling fire. I remember its light creating a comforting bubble in the growing darkness. With a beer in hand, I lounged back, letting the sounds of nature replace the worries of office deadlines and city life. The chirping of crickets, the distant hoot of an owl, and the fire's soft crackling were music to my ears. After soaking in the ambiance of nature for a while, I decided it was time to hit the sack. I put out the fire, zipped myself in, and closed my eyes. But just as I was teetering on the edge of sleep, an unsettling noise ripped through the night's calm. This wasn't something that you get to hear in the woods all the time. It was frantic, the thudding of hooves, fast-paced and growing louder. Deer? I thought. There seemed to be a lot of them, and they were moving quickly. As they whipped by my campsite, I could hear something giving chase as well. Whatever it was big. I listened as the hooves and their pursuer faded off into the distance. That was crazy, I thought to myself. Little did I know that the craziness was just getting started. For a moment, it was deafeningly quiet. But then, suddenly, a harrowing deer scream cut through the night. It wasn't a warning call, it was a call of distress. The last gasps of a forest creature pleading for its life. If you've never heard one, trust me, it's the stuff nightmares are made of. The forest instantly muted, as if every living thing was holding its breath. In the eerie silence, I strained to listen, my eyes wide and my body frozen in place. For probably 20 minutes it was completely silent, like everything in the forest knew something terrible had just happened, and nothing wanted any part of it. The silence was finally broken by the sound of something approaching. It crept closer and closer. I was so frozen that I couldn't even blink. I could hear twigs breaking and leaves rustling. It was as if whatever was approaching wanted me to know that it was. As it neared my campsite, it stopped. Whatever it was seemed to be just on the periphery of my campsite now. For a few seconds there was silence, but then a deep guttural growl vibrated through the ground, resonating within my chest and setting my nerves on edge. Thoughts raced through my mind. Was it a bear? What else could it be? I've never been so overcome with fear before in my life. The only thing I could think to do was stay quiet and hope that whatever it was would lose interest. Then, out of nowhere, a horrific snap echoed through the woods, quickly followed by a heavy thud just a few feet from my tent. My heart pounded like a jackhammer in my chest. The thin fabric of my tent felt utterly inadequate against whatever lurked outside. Then, I heard the sound of leaves rustling and twigs breaking once again. I followed the sound as it slowly made its way around the exterior of my campsite and trailed off into the woods, becoming more and more distant. It seemed that my strategy, or whatever you want to call it, of remaining still and quiet had worked. Whatever it was had lost interest and made its way out. Still petrified with fear, I continued to lay there frozen. When morning finally broke, the golden rays of the sun penetrated through the thin veil of my tent. With trembling hands, I cautiously unzipped it, not knowing what to expect. Stepping out, the sight of what my eyes caught would be seared into my mind forever. It was the lower portion of a torn deer leg. I say torn, because that was exactly what it was. Its raw and ragged edges made it clear that it had been torn off and not cut. Without wasting a second, I packed up. My earlier love for the forest was now replaced with a bone-deep dread. I loaded up and made my way out, leaving the leg and the forest in my rearview mirror. Seeking the comfort of civilization, I stopped at a diner to get some coffee and process my thoughts. So many things ran through my mind. What in the hell came through my campsite last night? What has the power to produce such a deep, reverberating growl like that? And what in the woods has the power to snap a leg off of a deer? A bear? That's impossible. It was clear, though. Whatever snapped that leg off of that deer was sending a message. You're in my territory, and you're not welcomed here. I returned to the city with a newfound appreciation for the comforts of urban life. The woods, while beautiful, harbor some secrets that we apparently don't yet understand. Whatever it is that's out there, I pray no other human being encounters like I did. They may not be as lucky as I was.